I never thought I'd see this day, I whispered to myself as the first rays of dawn crept through the half-open blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the nursery. Emily Carter, 28, standing barefoot on the hardwood floor, traced her fingers over the small crib she had spent weeks assembling, each piece of wood polished, each corner aligned perfectly, the scent of fresh paint mingling with the faint aroma of baby powder. Outside, the city hummed awake, sirens and horns muted by the distance, yet inside, her apartment was a fragile bubble of calm, a calm she had clung to while counting the days until her child's arrival. The maternity pillow on the couch still held the imprint of her restless night, the soft hum of the air conditioner barely masking the quick, uneven beat of her heart. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a sharp contrast to the soft glow of the morning, but she ignored it, letting the screen remain dark. She moved to the window, brushing a loose strand of honey blonde hair from her face, eyes scanning the street below where early commuters hustled by in hooded jackets, coffee cups in hand, oblivious to the small drama unfolding above. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the light gray cardigan around her shoulders, the fabric soft against her skin, carrying the faint scent of lavender from last night's shower. That's when she saw it, a flash of movement in the reflection of the glass, a shadow that didn't belong, a presence she had felt before but never this close, never so real. Victor Romano, 65, standing across the hall in his penthouse, had always held the city in his hands, a man whose silver hair glinted under the chandeliers like a crown of authority, eyes sharp and calculating, yet in that instant, they betrayed a flicker of something unguarded, a human reaction she wasn't prepared for. The sharpness of his tailored suit, the precise cut of his shoes, even the faint aroma of expensive cologne that drifted through the open window, seemed to dominate the morning air. Emily's pulse quickened, each beat loud in her ears, a visceral reminder of her own fragility and the life growing inside her. She clutched the letter she had left on the counter the night before, its edges worn, the ink slightly smudged from restless tears, words chosen carefully to speak more than any conversation could have allowed. The thought of leaving was both terrifying and liberating, a paradox that wrapped around her chest tighter than any embrace. Her gaze flicked once more to Victor, to the figure who had once promised her safety and now embodied a breach she could not overlook, the man whose power had always been a silent presence in every decision, every breath, every whispered conversation. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just enough to take a step back, letting the morning light bathe her in a quiet resolve. She was gone, at least for now, her absence a silent message, a heartbeat left behind in ink, in paper, in every careful pause she had left between the words. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware, indifferent, and yet Emily's departure cast a shadow over the glass and steel, a shadow of choices made, consequences embraced, and a heart quietly breaking in the sanctuary of a single apartment, where a crib waited, sunlight pooling softly across the empty floor, and the faint echo of a life altered before it had even begun. Victor Romano paced the polished floors of his penthouse, the sharp click of his shoes echoing faintly against the marble walls, each step measured, deliberate, a rhythm of impatience and calculation. His office, lined with books and artifacts collected over decades, smelled faintly of leather and old paper, a reminder of the empire he had built, a legacy of influence and meticulous control. The large windows framed the city below, sunlight spilling across the skyline, yet it brought him no comfort, only a mirror reflecting the absence that gnawed at him. He stopped at the desk, hands resting on the smooth surface, eyes narrowing as he examined the empty chair, the subtle signs that Emily had been there and was now gone. A folded piece of paper sat where her coffee mug usually rested, edges slightly worn, handwriting delicate yet precise, a quiet echo of her presence and her decision. The letter, brief yet loaded with intention, outlined boundaries and fears, a silent declaration that her choice to leave was not made lightly. Victor's breath caught in his chest as he read each carefully chosen word, a mixture of regret, longing, and an unspoken acknowledgement of his own failings. He felt the weight of her absence not as anger but as a tangible pressure pressing down on his shoulders, a reminder that power without trust is hollow, and authority without love is empty. Across town, Emily navigated the crowded streets with careful steps, her coat pulled tight around her growing belly, eyes scanning the sidewalks and alleyways for any hint of the world she had left behind, a world where every glance carried expectation and every shadow hinted at consequence. The city seemed to move in slow motion around her, horns and chatter fading into a dull hum, each footstep measured to conserve energy and maintain focus, a physical manifestation of the mental vigilance that had become second nature. She found a quiet cafe tucked between high-rise buildings, the warm scent of coffee and fresh pastries a temporary reprieve from the tension that had shadowed her since dawn. Choosing a seat by the window, she observed the people passing, couples laughing, children tugging at their parents' hands, strangers immersed in ordinary moments that reminded her of a life she wanted for her child, a life free from the constant scrutiny and silent threats that had marked her home. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, a grounding ritual, while she read and reread the lines of her own note, the rhythm of words and penmanship offering a sense of control amidst chaos. Back at the penthouse, Victor stood by the windows again, his reflection superimposed over the city, a solitary figure contemplating the vastness of what he could influence and the limits of what mattered most. The air between them, though miles apart, was thick with unspoken emotion, a tether invisible yet undeniable, linking choices and consequences, fear and hope, absence and longing. Both felt the weight of decisions made, the delicate balance of love and autonomy, and the quiet, persistent pull toward a resolution that neither could yet see, a story unfolding in silence, where every heartbeat mattered and every decision carried the potential to change everything. Emily sat in the quiet corner of the cafe, the hum of the espresso machine and the low murmur of conversation surrounding her like a cocoon, shielding her from the world she had temporarily left behind. The latte in her hand steamed gently, curls of vapor rising into the air, and she watched the city through rain-speckled windows, droplets tracing tiny paths down the glass as if mapping the currents of her own unsettled thoughts. Every face she passed, every hurried pedestrian outside, seemed to move with a certainty and rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos swirling inside her. She traced the edges of her handwritten letter, her fingertips brushing the inked words, the sense of purpose in those lines grounding her even as uncertainty gnawed at her. Victor Romano's presence lingered in her mind, a specter of control, of power, of decisions that carried weight beyond mere wealth or influence, and she could not deny the pull of that complex bond that had entwined them long before today's revelations. Across town, Victor stood in the library of his penthouse, the morning light falling through tall windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound volumes and artifacts from decades of careful accumulation, yet it failed to soften the rigidity in his posture, the tension etched into the lines of his face. He picked up the letter she had left behind, the paper cool and firm under his fingers, and read once more the careful phrasing, the silent insistence that her absence was both necessary and temporary. A mixture of respect, longing, and unease stirred in him, each emotion colliding with the next, refusing to settle, leaving him pacing once again across the polished floor, every step deliberate, every breath measured. Emily, meanwhile, sipped her latte, feeling the warmth spread through her hands and into her chest, a small comfort, a temporary reprieve from the storm of emotion she carried, and she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, considering the life she wanted for herself and her child, the balance between love and autonomy, the quiet assertion of boundaries that had never felt more essential. The cafe's soft lighting highlighted the slight curve of her smile as she imagined a future where she could breathe freely, make decisions without fear, and shape a space that belonged to her alone, even if the heart that loved Victor still beat within her. Victor's thoughts mirrored this distance, his eyes drifting to the city below, to streets and rooftops that seemed endless, yet his mind remained locked on the woman who had stepped away, whose courage and decision-making challenged his perception of power and compelled him to reckon with vulnerability he seldom acknowledged. Every detail of the morning, from the angle of sunlight on marble to the muted rush of traffic outside Emily's window, was recorded in the silent dialogue between absence and presence, between departure and the inevitable confrontation that would come, between what was controlled and what remained unclaimed. Both felt the weight of possibility, the tension of choices made and postponed, the delicate balance between separation and connection, and in that suspended time, neither movement nor word could bridge the distance, yet both were acutely aware that each decision, each heartbeat, each measured breath, carried the potential to redraw the lines of their intertwined lives. The rain had begun to fall again, a steady drizzle tapping against the large windows of the cafe, tiny rivulets tracing paths down the glass, each one catching the morning light and bending it into fractured patterns that seemed almost symbolic of the fractured calm in Emily's mind. She shifted in her seat, the warmth of the cup against her palms grounding her as the distant sound of car horns and footsteps became a muted rhythm beneath her thoughts. Outside, people moved briskly, umbrellas opening and closing in the soft gray haze, yet inside, she felt a sense of suspended time, a moment held between the past she had left behind and the future she was cautiously stepping into. Her eyes flicked to the letter on the table, the paper slightly curled at the edges, words written with deliberate care, each sentence a thread tying her courage to her intent, a reminder that absence could carry meaning just as powerfully as presence. Victor Romano, back in his penthouse, stared at the city below, the skyscrapers reflecting the overcast sky in sheets of mirrored gray, each reflection a distortion, a hint at the uncertainty that now pervaded his carefully ordered world. He touched the letter as if it were a fragile artifact, his fingers tracing the folds, feeling the imprint of her resolve, the weight of decisions that had been made in silence and without confrontation. Across the street, Emily watched a young couple laughing, their voices carrying over the drizzle, and she felt a pang of longing, a reminder of the life she sought for herself and the child she carried, a life marked by choices and boundaries, where her autonomy would not be compromised. The cafe's soft lighting cast gentle shadows across her face, highlighting the tension in her jaw, the slight crease between her brows, yet also revealing a quiet determination that had grown from hours of reflection and the clarity that comes with decisive action. Victor's gaze remained fixed on the skyline, the shifting clouds mirrored in his mind, thoughts of Emily intertwined with memories of shared moments, unspoken words, and the realization that influence and control were powerless against the resolve of someone who had made a decision born of necessity and love. Emily took a slow breath, allowing the aroma of coffee and the muted warmth of the morning to steady her racing thoughts, her mind charting possible paths forward, weighing risk and security, freedom and attachment, each calculation precise yet infused with emotion. Victor walked to the balcony, hands resting lightly on the railing, feeling the faint vibration of the city, the pulse of life below, a reminder that while power could shape landscapes, it could not shape the hearts and choices of those he loved. Emily's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the gray sky met the distant skyline, and she imagined a future shaped by her own decisions, a path forged with care and foresight, while Victor, observing the same horizon from above, understood that the quiet absence between them spoke volumes, that the bridge between control and understanding was measured not in proximity but in respect for the choices made and the silent promises held within the heart. Both were suspended in that space, separated by blocks of city streets and rain-soaked sidewalks, yet bound by the invisible threads of consequence, emotion, and the quiet, unyielding pull of lives intertwined despite distance, circumstance, and the gentle insistence of hope. Emily left the cafe with a quiet determination, the soft drizzle clinging to her coat and the slight chill in the air urging her steps forward, each footfall deliberate on the slick sidewalk, echoing the rhythm of her racing thoughts. She hugged her growing belly instinctively, a protective gesture that felt both natural and necessary, the life within her a constant reminder of the stakes she carried. The city around her moved with its usual frenetic pace, umbrellas bobbing like distant sea creatures, car engines murmuring beneath the gray sky, yet she felt a bubble of stillness enveloping her, a temporary sanctuary carved from choice and courage. She found a small park tucked between high-rise buildings, the grass wet and glistening, benches empty in the early hours, and she sat down, allowing the rhythm of her breathing to sync with the gentle patter of rain, each inhale steady, each exhale deliberate, grounding her in the present moment. Victor, meanwhile, moved through the corridors of his penthouse with a quiet focus, the morning light filtering through the blinds, casting long, angular shadows across the marble floors, highlighting the sharp edges of the space as if to mirror the sharpness of his mind and the complexity of the situation. He picked up a framed photograph of Emily from his desk, her smile in the captured moment soft and warm, a contrast to the tension now residing between them, and he traced the curve of her lips with his finger, a silent acknowledgement of the absence that had become a presence in his consciousness. Emily watched a small bird hop along the damp path, pausing in between showers to shake off droplets, and she found a strange sense of kinship in its quiet resilience, the simplicity of its instinctive actions offering a counterpoint to the intricacy of her own decisions. The letter she had left on the counter remained a touchstone in her mind, its words a framework for her reasoning, a silent dialogue that bridged the physical distance between her and Victor, a conduit for emotion that neither could fully articulate aloud. Back at the penthouse, Victor stood by the window overlooking the cityscape, the glass cool beneath his palm, the reflections of buildings and sky layering over one another, fragmented yet coherent, much like the thoughts swirling through his mind, each one representing a decision, a memory, a hope, or a regret. Emily's gaze wandered over the park, the puddles reflecting fragments of clouds, the occasional passerby moving with oblivious purpose, and she felt a quiet surge of control over her own narrative, a sense of agency that was both liberating and heavy with responsibility. Victor turned away from the window, pacing briefly, considering not just the absence of Emily but the consequences of his own actions and inactions, the gaps between intention and outcome, and the spaces where misunderstanding had sown distance. Emily took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a bottle she had pulled from her bag, allowing the cool liquid to steady her, to center her thoughts, while Victor reached for a notebook on his desk, scribbling reflections and possibilities, a mental map of the paths forward, each line a negotiation between heart and obligation. Both existed in parallel moments, separated by streets, buildings, and circumstances, yet bound by the threads of consequence, care, and an unspoken promise that the next meeting, when it came, would carry the weight of all these silent hours, all these careful observations, and the quiet, persistent pull of a life intertwined beyond distance and decision. Emily found herself walking along a quiet stretch of cobblestone streets, the late morning drizzle soft against her coat and the rhythmic sound of her shoes tapping against the stones anchoring her in the moment. Each step brought her further from the familiar skyline and closer to a sense of control she had not felt in weeks, a delicate balance between fear and courage that made each breath deliberate and each glance purposeful. She carried a small satchel over her shoulder, its contents carefully selected for practicality and necessity, a few personal items, a notebook, and her phone, though she had silenced it to maintain her solitude in focus. The smell of damp earth and rain on stone filled her senses, grounding her in the physicality of the city even as her mind wandered through memories and plans, imagining the conversations she might have, the explanations she would give, and the boundaries she would maintain for herself and her child. Victor Romano, on the other hand, remained in his penthouse, the sunlight now brighter through the wide windows, casting sharp lines and highlighting the meticulous order of the space he controlled, yet it offered little comfort as he considered Emily's absence and the implications of her decisions. He moved slowly through the rooms, pausing at objects that reminded him of her presence, a photograph on the desk, a scarf left hanging on a chair, each item a quiet accusation and a reminder of her independence. Emily paused at a small public garden tucked between buildings, watching the wet leaves shimmer, the patterns of rain on the benches creating reflections that seemed to tell stories she could only imagine. She traced the edge of the fountain with her finger, feeling the cold stone and the movement of water, a reminder that life continued in its rhythm even when moments of uncertainty disrupted the plans and expectations she had held. Victor, in parallel, sat in a leather chair near the window, hands clasped loosely, the letter she had left spread on the table before him, reading and rereading the lines as if searching for hidden meanings or missed nuances, each word reinforcing the awareness that control and authority were insufficient without understanding and respect. Emily's steps carried her to a small apartment she had found to temporarily call her own, the interior modest yet comfortable, a space where she could breathe, think, and plan, free from the constant awareness of Victor's presence and influence. She set down her satchel, ran her hands over the furniture and familiar objects, a tactile reassurance that she could shape her environment, her choices, and the life she would bring into the world. Victor's mind, meanwhile, continued to orbit her absence, calculating, reflecting, and feeling the subtle ache of connection and loss, recognizing that distance, while challenging, was a space for thought, for reconsideration, and perhaps for understanding. Emily opened her notebook, pen poised, writing not just logistics but reflections, hopes, and strategies, each sentence a careful articulation of her intentions, a silent conversation with the man whose shadow still lingered despite her distance. Both existed in their respective worlds, separated physically but linked emotionally, each decision, each observation, each careful action weaving together the complex tapestry of consequences, care, and anticipation, the quiet tension of separation filled with the weight of unspoken thoughts and the enduring pull of intertwined lives. Emily's evening unfolded with the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, the gentle patter of rain creating a rhythm that matched the quiet resolve in her chest. She walked slowly through familiar neighborhoods, the scent of damp earth and asphalt mingling with the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from corner bakeries, each step a reminder of ordinary life continuing beyond the tension that had defined her morning. She paused occasionally, glancing at shop windows, watching reflections of herself and the city blur together, a visual metaphor for the uncertainty and shifting perspectives she carried within. At a small park bench, she sat and allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling the subtle movements of her growing child, a steady presence that provided clarity and purpose, reminding her that each choice now was layered with responsibility and hope. Victor Romano, miles away in his high-rise, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretching endlessly beneath him, lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached, and he traced the outline of Emily's photograph again, fingertips brushing over her smile, over the corners of her eyes, absorbing the subtle details that made her presence palpable even in absence. Emily's mind wandered as she observed children playing under the fading light, their laughter echoing softly through the park, and she imagined the life she wanted for her own child, a world built on careful decisions, protection, and autonomy, a life distinct from the complicated shadows that lingered from her past. Victor walked slowly to his study, notebook in hand, writing reflections, noting observations, tracing the fine line between influence and respect, power and understanding, each thought a step toward bridging the distance that had grown between them without overstepping boundaries that were now clearly defined. Emily felt the cooling damp of the evening air on her cheeks, a sensory anchor that grounded her thoughts as she considered logistics, safety, and the careful mapping of her next moves, while maintaining the quiet hope that Victor's presence, though distant, was not gone entirely, that mutual care could still be acknowledged through the respectful space she had created. The park seemed suspended in that golden hour, leaves shimmering from recent rain, puddles reflecting the soft light, each ripple a gentle reminder that change was constant and that resilience required both patience and awareness. Victor, seated at his desk, paused to gaze at the skyline, watching the transition from day to night, the city breathing beneath him, and he allowed himself a moment to recognize the strength and deliberate thought Emily brought to her decisions, appreciating the gravity of her independence even as he longed for reconciliation. Emily finally rose from the bench, feeling the weight of the day and the calm that came with intentional movement, walking toward the quiet streets that led her to temporary refuge, her steps confident despite the uncertainty ahead, each measured stride echoing a silent determination that neither distance nor circumstance could diminish. Both existed in parallel spaces, the city between them, yet emotionally tethered through reflection, consideration, and the awareness that each action carried consequence, responsibility, and the quiet, enduring pull of connection that awaited the next moment of choice. Emily finally reached the small apartment she had chosen as her temporary sanctuary, the door closing softly behind her with a quiet click that seemed to seal the outside world away. The room was modest, with pale walls and simple furnishings, yet it radiated a sense of calm that she had not felt in weeks, a safe space carved out by her own careful decisions. She set her satchel down on the table and ran her hands over the surfaces, noting the warmth of the wooden tabletop, the slight unevenness in the floorboards, the subtle hum of the heating system that reminded her of home without being intrusive. A gentle light from the street lamp outside filtered through the blinds, creating delicate patterns on the floor that shifted with the evening wind, and she felt a quiet comfort in the interplay of shadow and light, a visual echo of the balance she sought in her own life. Sitting on the edge of the couch, Emily opened her notebook, fingers tracing the lines she had drawn and the thoughts she had penned earlier, each word a declaration of intent, each sentence a measure of control in a world that had seemed unpredictable for too long. She paused to close her eyes, listening to the distant sounds of the city, the soft murmur of traffic, the occasional shout or laugh carried faintly from the streets, and she allowed herself to breathe, deep and deliberate, sensing the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the life growing within her, a steady, grounding presence amidst uncertainty. Miles away, Victor Romano moved through his penthouse with a measured pace, stopping occasionally to look out across the city skyline, the lights of buildings beginning to twinkle as evening settled in, reflections of clouds and shadows playing across the glass and marble, a city alive with movement yet suspended in a quiet tension similar to his own. He held the photograph of Emily again, eyes lingering on her features, memorizing the gentle curve of her smile, the warmth in her gaze, and feeling the weight of her absence, not as anger but as an awareness of the consequences of choices and the responsibility that accompanies care. Emily sipped water from a bottle she had brought with her, the cool liquid steadying her thoughts, and she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the path she had chosen, on the quiet assertion of boundaries that protected both herself and her child, on the deliberate steps she had taken to ensure her autonomy while still holding space for the connection that remained unbroken by distance. Victor, seated near the window, notebook open before him, wrote observations, reflections, considerations of next steps, the ink moving deliberately across the page as he traced the map of decisions and emotions, each line a negotiation between the influence he commanded and the respect he now understood must accompany it. Emily moved to the window of her temporary apartment, watching the city below, the glow of streetlights illuminating wet pavement, reflections dancing across puddles, each movement of light a reminder of impermanence and possibility, while Victor, in parallel, allowed himself a rare moment of contemplation, recognizing that her absence was not a void but a space for thought, growth, and eventual reconciliation, and that the threads connecting them, though stretched by distance and circumstance, remained intact, poised to guide them toward understanding, trust, and the careful navigation of the lives they shared. As night fell over the city, Emily stood by the window of her temporary apartment, the streets below slick with recent rain, streetlights reflecting in the puddles like scattered fragments of gold and silver. She watched as pedestrians hurried home, umbrellas bobbing in rhythm with their footsteps, each one seemingly unaware of the quiet tension that had defined her day. Her hands rested gently on her growing belly, a subtle, constant reminder of the life she was nurturing and the decisions that now guided both their futures. She allowed herself to breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of rain on concrete, the faint aroma of her evening tea, and feeling the pulse of the city as a distant, calming rhythm. Victor Romano, meanwhile, moved through the quiet corridors of his penthouse, the glow of lamps casting long shadows across the marble floors, highlighting the meticulous order of his surroundings, the precision of his environment, a reflection of the control he wielded yet could not impose over absence. He picked up the letter she had left, reading once more the careful phrasing, the delicate expression of intent and boundary, and felt a mixture of respect and longing, an acknowledgement of her courage and the space she had claimed for herself. Emily paced lightly across the small living area, considering the routes she would take, the practicalities of safety, and the quiet assertion of independence, each step deliberate, each motion reinforcing her sense of agency and resolve. Victor moved to the balcony, overlooking the cityscape illuminated by thousands of tiny lights, each one a reminder of lives continuing in parallel, of choices made and yet to be made, and he felt the tug of connection, the invisible threads linking him to her even across distance and circumstance. Emily opened her notebook, pen poised, and began writing reflections, strategies, and thoughts, each line a careful articulation of her intent, a silent dialogue bridging the physical gap and reinforcing her own clarity and purpose. Victor, seated near the expansive windows of his study, traced the skyline with his eyes, considering the balance between influence and respect, authority and empathy, each reflection a preparation for eventual reconnection, for a conversation that would require patience, understanding, and acknowledgement of choices and consequences. Emily leaned against the sill, watching the gentle movement of leaves stirred by a light evening breeze, the patterns of shadow and light shifting across the floor, mirroring the subtle shifts in her own thoughts, the quiet negotiation between desire for peace and the responsibility she bore. Victor traced the contours of the room with his gaze, visualizing her presence, imagining the careful way she moved, the deliberate steps she took, and feeling the gravity of her decisions, the silent communication carried in distance and thought. Both existed in these parallel moments, separated by streets, buildings, and circumstance, yet deeply entwined by reflection, respect, and the steady, enduring pull of lives intertwined, a quiet anticipation that each careful decision, each measured breath, and each unspoken word would ultimately shape the path toward understanding, reconciliation, and the mindful nurturing of the life they both held dear.